Welcome to Under the Radar, a show about independent iOS app development. I'm Marco Arment.
And I'm David Smith. Under the Radar is never longer than 30 minutes, so let's get started. So today we are going to be talking about reviews in the App Store.
Again.
So if you're an eagle-eared listener of the show, you will realize that just 2 weeks ago in episode 62, we were talking about reviews in the App Store, and little did we know that here we are a fortnight later, we would be doing it again. Not necessarily the plan, but Apple announced yesterday, as we're recording, a bunch of updates specifically around iOS 10.3, and included in that is a fairly substantial pair of changes to the review system in the App Store. And so it seemed kind of only appropriate to follow up on that, to talk about it, just because now, sort of going forward, whatever we said 2 weeks ago is going to have to make sense in this broader context that Apple is changing. So the short version is Apple is introducing two changes. The first is a standardized way for asking for reviews modally within your applications with a thing called SK Store Review Controller. And then the second thing they're doing is they're going to be changing the App Store itself to allow developers to respond to customer reviews that are written in the App Store. So we'll kind of work through those individually, but probably starting off by talking about the new modal display that we can get. It's probably worth saying this is actually not the first time that Apple has had a modal, would you like to review this application dialogue? The first version of this, which you'd have to have been doing iOS development for a while to remember, there used to be a thing in the App Store where when you deleted an app, only when you deleted it, it would pop up and say, before you delete this app, would you like to leave a review?
So bad.
Yeah. I'm not sure where they thought this was a great idea, that if you, like someone who has actively said, I no longer want this app, and then you ask them, well, what did you think about it?
And that was the only time they were ever prompted to review apps.
Yeah. Not unsurprisingly, there were a lot of one-star reviews that came through that system.
Ugh.
So this one's better. So the new system, which I'll just kind of briefly overview, is there's a new method, like I said, the SK Store Review Controller in StoreKit, that you can call a method just says request review. And this method is interesting because it doesn't pop up necessarily a modal display. It's probably worth saying this is always modal. This is not like a sort of a button that you can push in your app and then have it bring it up. This is something where it's always going to be slightly an interruption in terms of the way they're structuring it, because you call this method and you say, this is probably a good time to request an App Store review. You have no guarantees as to whether that modal will actually pop up then or not. We'll get into reasons a bit later, but Apple is keeping control over whether anything is actually shown to you. But you can say, this is a good time. So say, for example, like the usual examples that people will throw around is, a customer completes something that would make sense that, like say I have an audiobook app, which I do, and say you have just finished a book. That may be a good time to prompt them to write a review. They've just completed this thing. Hopefully they enjoyed it. They now have a full sense of the app. It's not really an interruption in the same way because they're not, it's not like they're opening up the app to go and listen. Like the app, they just finished listening to all of their things. And so now may be a reasonable time, but you can say this is a good time. And if Apple says it's a good idea, it'll pop up and show this alert to them. And they're also adding they're tweaking things a little bit in terms of giving us an explicit URL to link out to the App Store with sort of deep linking, if we still want to do the setting screen version. That's now sort of part of this, but that's not really part of the SDK. But that's just they're saying in the documentation that if you want to do a modal pop-up in the app to leave a review, use this new request review method. If you would still like to have like a button in your setting screen, here's the query parameter that you can add to the end. Overall, I think, mostly what I love about this is that Apple is taking this seriously and doing something about it. I think it's been a problem it's been years now that we've had this situation where there's so much ambiguity. There's no leadership on the App Store policy side of things about this. And so you end up with this weird kind of asymmetric warfare where, having 5 stars in the App Store is an important thing for sales. The best way to get that is to keep bugging your users to give you those reviews. And if you do that, you'll be rewarded with more downloads. And that creates this vicious cycle that if you don't want to get into that, then your app's at a disadvantage because you don't, it's like if you're comparing my app, which has, 20 or 30 reviews to an app that has 200 or 300 reviews, it looks bad. And so at least what I like here is that Apple is saying, this is an important thing for us to dive into. This is something that they want to have some control over. And then obviously, I love the way that in classic Apple fashion, they're maintaining a lot of control about it. that it isn't an API that we can always pop up a dialog for in the same way that when they added the Mail Compose UI, where we can write emails within our apps without having to go out to the Mail app, they did that in a way that we can always pop that up. It's not like we're going to request a compose page and it doesn't show up.
That actually isn't true, but you could query it to determine whether it was enabled or not.
Sure, but what you're saying there is the can send mail part,
yeah.
Which is does the user have mail configured on their iPhone? But assuming they have a mail account configured with their iPhone, it'll always show up. Is what I'm getting at. But here, Apple has the ability to dial this backwards and forwards, and so they've initially said through a couple of interviews, it seemed like they gave to Daring Fireball and Jim Dalrymple at the Loop. They're going to basically, if you're never going to show a user a prompt more than 3 times a year, I believe, and if they set if they actually do send a review, they won't be asked again for a year. So if you asked, every time the app launched, you said, hey, it's a great time to send a review. After doing that 3 times, it'll stop working in a transparent way to you for a whole year. And there's also a master switch in the settings app that a customer can say, I never want to see these. And if you flip that switch, irrespective of how much the developer is saying, hey, review me, it'll never actually work. Which overall, I think this is a good step forward. I'm not sure if I'm going to use it. I think I probably won't initially because it's still modal, and I'd rather just use the deep linking into the App Store from a button in my settings page. But I like, at the very least, that Apple is diving into this and taking it seriously. Do you think you're going to use it?
Probably not, for the same reason of, it is still modal and everything. But I really do love... this is such, as you said, this is such an amazing, a very Apple-y solution to a problem. It's so clever, and it's here was this problem of developers having a very strong incentive to make the user experience worse for people. And it was extra work for developers too to have to integrate some library or to build their own little pop-up things, and so it was you take this kind of dirty, messy problem and you apply a really elegant combination of solutions to it, which is we're going to standardize this. We're going to make it easier when people do want to leave ratings because have you seen the box yet? It's the one in the beta, it just pops up with a little 1 through 5 stars and submit. And so it's actually easier to submit ratings this way as a user because you don't have to bounce into the App Store app and submit something there and log in, type in your password. You just have it all in a modal dialog right there in the app. So it's easier for the developer because it's one line of code. It's easier for the user because to actually leave the rating, and it's faster and everything. And in the most typical wonderful Apple fashion, it puts all the control of this back on the user. So the user can then, as you said, go into that setting, go into system settings and disable these globally if they want to. And then the developer has no way to tell whether they're enabled or not and whether it's showing or not. So in theory, this is an amazing solution for both developers and for users and for usability of the platform because it kind of tames this messy thing that we all have a very strong incentive to do. In practice, and again, in theory, the way this works is that at a future time that is as yet unspecified. By the way, I gotta say, I really am not crazy about the way Apple has very minimally documented this on the page, and then has given additional documentation through PR channels to a couple of blogs. That I think is odd. I know I can see why they do it. I assume they do it so that way they can be a little bit fuzzy and squishy with the rules and change them later as they evolve and as the situation evolves and as they learn how these things are used in practice. But I don't like the idea that you have to be monitoring different blogs from people who are PR friendly with Apple in order to get the whole picture of what the rules are and what the mechanics are. I think it would be a lot more effective for Apple to to just expand the documentation up front, make that part of the official statement, and then we worry about later, the process of changing that as policies evolve, because App Store policy changes. It's a thing. Like, hiding the information between different blogs and PR channels to try to obfuscate it so most people don't hear it is not the right solution. Anyway, so one of the bits of information that is kind of unclear and told through PR channels in various ways is that it will be required at some point in the future that all review prompts use this API, and that other types of review prompts will be prohibited. That date has not yet been set, but at some point that will be the case. The requirement that these things be only sent in this way and to disallow other types of prompting is required for this to be a good user experience. Because without that part, you're going to have no incentive for a lot of developers to use it. It is faster, yes, but developers are going to find, especially big data-driven corporations like Twitter, Instagram, stuff like that, they're going to find, well, we get more reviews if we just ask the old way, because that can't be disabled or throttled by the system. So, and then the other interesting part, of course, is all the different obfuscation that developers put in front of these things often. They'll be like, how are you liking the app so far? And if you say you're loving it, then they'll ask you to review it. And if you say, I'm not loving it so much, they'll be like, oh, please contact us privately. So there's all this mess to have to work through. But unless developers are forced to only use this system, it's not going to get better for users. And Apple has said, yes, they intend to do that in the future. They intend to make that a requirement. My question is, how are they going to enforce that? Because already today, you have clear rules against using push notifications for spam, marketing, promotion, things like that. And you look around, every game uses it for promotion. Every news app, every big company app, Twitter, the App Store uses notifications sometimes for promotional purposes and marketing purposes. Apple can't even follow that rule. They break it all the time. Everyone breaks that rule all the time. And even though there's app review rules against it, I assume one of the reasons why that rule goes almost completely unenforced, even unfollowed by Apple, is that it's really hard to actually enforce that in practice without adding a report mechanism in the UI. Because the only way Apple's going to catch people sending spam notifications or marketing, however they define that, is if it happens during the 5 minutes they're reviewing it during app review. And that's very unlikely. And so in practice, that just goes effectively unenforced, and spam/promotional push notifications are rampant. And with this system, this new review system, I wonder if that's going to, how is that going to be any different? Because if the rule starts to become, well, you have to use this mechanism only to ask people to review you in the App Store, when are they going to actually enforce that? They're not going to have people using every app on the App Store for 3 days to see if they get prompted or not. And so the only way to enforce that is to have some kind of reporting system after the fact. But I can't possibly see Apple gumming up the UI of iOS. Where would it be? The 3D touch menu? Where the share thing is? I can't see them gumming up the iOS UI anywhere with a report bad behavior of this app button. I mean, it'd be interesting if they did. I'm not sure if that would be overall good or not for the system, but for the purpose of enforcement of tricky rules like this, I don't see any other way to do it. And without that enforcement of that rule, without very strict enforcement of that rule, I don't see how the system is going to actually fix the problem for developers who have a company and big data behind them saying they still have to do it the old way.
Sure. I mean, I see where you're coming from, but maybe I have slightly more hope for the future. Because I see this thing and I see what, I like when they say at some point in the future, this will be the only sanctioned way to do this. I tend to read this as, in iOS 10.3, it'll be fine, but in iOS 11, it probably won't. If I had to guess at what that timeline will be, is that this June-ish at WWDC, they'll be unveiling whatever it is they're going to be doing for iOS 11, and as part of the rules that will go into effect for this fall, this will be one of the new rules that if you want to, modally prompt a user for a review, you must do it using the pre-approved API. The enforcement question is, I mean, it's always it's always rough, but just to sort of to say that it's incredibly difficult to enforce or police doesn't mean that it's not a good policy. And I mean, I think there's ways that Apple can enforce it programmatically, both in terms of obviously they know when people are leaving reviews, they know where they're coming from, what they were doing before that. Like there's a certain amount of exposure that they have on the data side, that if an app is seeming to send users to the App Store to leave reviews at a pace that seems inconsistent with the install base, for example. Like, so my guess is they have a fairly good sense of, what the typical rate for reviews for an app based on how many people are using it is and things. Like, I think they have tools from the data side on the back end in many ways they could sort of piggyback on what they've done with iTunes Connect Analytics, which like have their drawbacks, but at least give them a starting point that I imagine with a little bit of math, you could work out this app is clearly getting way more reviews than it should for using the approaches that we expect. And from that perspective, and then you can sort of chase that down and kind of work that out. But ultimately, like exactly how they police it, I think is, that's an enforcement problem. That's something that we deal with a lot in the App Store. And I think, the unfortunate thing is what Apple often seems to do is they'll pick a few,
examples,
sacrificial lambs
yep.
to be made of, and like some app is going to get pulled out of the App Store for a week because they prompted for review after the policy goes into effect, and that kind of you can kind of scare people into compliance down the road, which it's not great if you're that app, but as you're saying, like it's a really hard thing to enforce.
Well, it also doesn't work. Like that only works if all iOS developers are part of the same community and everyone follows the rules, and neither of those things are true.
Sure, but I mean, I think it's one of these things of they're never going to get 100% compliance, but if they can get 80% compliance, that's still probably good enough.
That's
and
true.
So I like that it says this is their policy. This is where they're heading. Down the road, there'll be a world where most of the time, if you're a user who just doesn't want to leave reviews, you can flip a master switch. Otherwise, you'll be prompted 3 times a year to do it in a standardized way with this, a non sort of scammy interaction. And I like that, but maybe I just have more hope for that if they've invested all this effort in building this API and taking this problem seriously, they're also going to be serious about the enforcement side and do their best to make that work.
Yeah, I hope so. I guess we'll see. Also, a point of clarification. You breezed by it earlier, but I do want to clarify because a lot of people are getting this wrong on Twitter, that linking people out with a thing, with like a page, like in your settings, like what you and I do. I have like my little thing in Overcast settings saying this many people have reviewed this version, click here to go leave a review. That's still both possible and allowed. Apple has clarified that in some of these PR statements, that you can still do that. That will still work. It just won't use this API. You can use this API additionally if you want to, but linking out to the page via an explicit user action is still permitted, as long as you didn't do a modal dialog box, which again it's like the distinctions here are going to make this harder and harder to enforce. But anyway, hopefully we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Anyway, we are sponsored this week by Hired. We all know that searching for a new job can feel stressful, scary, and time-consuming. Pushy recruiters try to sell you on roles you don't actually want, and job boards can make you feel like you're throwing your resume into a black hole, never to be seen again. This is where Hired comes in. Hired makes your job search faster, focused, and stress-free. They offer access to 4,000 innovative employers, including big brand names like Facebook and smaller emerging startups. On Hired, you receive personalized interview requests and upfront salary information, thank goodness, so you can make informed decisions about which opportunities to pursue. Today, listeners can earn double the normal $1,000 hiring bonus by signing up with our link, hired.com/undertheradar. That's right, you can earn $2,000 for finding your next chapter on Hired by using hired.com/undertheradar. Sign up today to connect with opportunity.
So the other part that we probably should dive into about this whole system is, so once people have left the reviews in whatever mechanism you've used to get them to that page, whether it's the modal pop-up, you're linking to them from the settings page in your app store, or in your settings app in your screen, or they just went to the app store themselves. In 10.3, we're going to also have the ability to respond to customer reviews that are left in the App Store. Exactly how this looks is a bit up to debate, but I mean, this is something that the Google Play Store, for example, has had for a while. So I imagine it'll have a similar kind of appearance where if you went to the ratings and reviews section of an app's page, a customer leaves a review, underneath of it, there may be there'll be a little bubble that says that the, developer can put some text into, and there'll probably be some limits onto the number of characters or things like that. But, the expectation, I think, is that we're going to be going into iTunes Connect, and there's already actually, I'm not sure if, how many people actually ever go there, but in iTunes Connect, if you dig around a little bit, there's actually a ratings and reviews area for your app. Where it shows you all of the reviews that have ever been left. And my guess is they're just going to add a little text box underneath all of those where, we can log into iTunes Connect and go through and respond to this. And I think we've had a few clarifications about this where it's not going to be like a threaded conversation. They're not turning the review section into like a forum, but it's going to be, a customer can write a review and a developer can write a response. And both parties can edit those, the review or the response as makes sense. But it's not like we're going to have a back and forth. I like this, I think. I like it mostly just from the perspective of one of the most like discouraging things you'll ever run into, is when you read a review, which granted I don't do as much anymore, but it's still something I do from time to time. And you encounter a user who says like they like the app, but they wish it did X. And maybe they hold a hostage star about that. It's a 4, they'll give it 4 stars. I would give it 5 if it could do this.
You're lucky if they only hold 1 star back for that.
Or maybe it's a double hostage star situation. Like there's lots of, variables that come into play here. But if they do that, and it turns out the app actually does that, and they just don't know how to do it. Like this seems like a great tool for being able to say, hey, if you, click on this button, you are actually able to do this, and you can hopefully clarify those misunderstandings. It's obviously not going to be a great mechanism to do like detailed customer support. My guess is a lot of developers' responses to these are just going to be, I'm sorry you're having trouble with this. Please email me to go deeper on this and to actually resolve your problem. So in that sense, like it's not going to be a great venue for that. But I think it's nice though for if another customer comes around and they, here's this 2-star review that says, hey, the app doesn't do this, or it didn't do this right, or something like that. And then underneath of it, it says that, there's a developer response that says, I'm sorry you have this trouble. You can actually do that. Here's how you do it. If you need more help, send me an email and I'm happy to walk that through. Like that sets up a better, it turns a negative customer experience into potentially a positive one. I'm not super excited though that it's like another inbox that we have to manage and another like thing that we just sort of have to keep up with. Like there's this new bit of busy work, but I mean the reality is overall I'd rather a system like this where at least I can do something to respond to these misunderstandings or these bad reviews and to hopefully turn them around a little bit. But the reality is I'm probably just going to end up, so I have hired someone to do my customer support for me, and this will just likely be another inbox that he goes through on a regular basis to kind of respond and clean up. And hopefully it'll make that section of the App Store a little bit more useful, I suppose. Like right now, it's just not.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it'll depend a lot on what kind of uptake this gets, and just a lot of the implementation details. 2 weeks ago when we talked about reading App Store reviews, my position was, I almost never read them. You don't really need to. I don't think many people do. For apps that have sufficient star ratings, they just look at the star rating average and then make a decision for the most part. And there aren't a lot of people who read through every review, so it's not that big of a deal. And of course, again, all these problems are shifted and magnified or minimized based on whether you have a lot of reviews or very few reviews. But assuming you have like a moderate to high amount, it's these things all average out. So anyway, it depends a lot on like how many customers are actually reading these things, and then also how many developers will be responding. If it's the kind of thing that's pretty rare that almost no developers end up doing in any kind of reasonable quantity, and that most customers don't end up expecting or reading or seeing, then it's completely optional whether you do it or not, and you probably don't need to, because that's a lot of time and effort for 0 to 1 person to see. But if it ends up being something that is important, which again, it depends on implementation details, there's a lot of questions like, where do we respond? I assume we respond to these in iTunes Connect somewhere. If so, that is a massive opportunity for a third-party developer. If you need an idea for your next Mac app or web service, make that happen. Make it so that you can scrape all the reviews from all the different languages, all the different country stores, have some kind of built-in translation function, and give us a way to reply easily. You will sell that to every iOS developer who cares. You can sell that for $10 a month, easy. Anyway, so anybody who needs an idea, get on that. If not, app figures, that's your next thing. All right, so anyway, and a lot of the implementation details matter. So for instance, is the customer notified when you respond to their review? That's a big question, because a lot of these reviews I think are kind of hit and run. They're not going to actually come back and check to see if you responded most of the time. Again, if that's not done, if the customer is not notified that you responded, and preferably with your response in the notification email or whatever, then it's going to be a lot less valuable for you to reply. So again, this depends a lot on the details that we don't know yet. But I think those are my two big questions: is will people see your response really en masse? And then, and two, and then two, will the author of the comment or of the review see your response? That will decide whether this is worth doing or not. This could turn my advice into, yes, go read your reviews and respond in a reasonable amount of time to things that deserve a response. It's probably just going to be a whole bunch of form responses from you mentioned, it'll be developers saying, oh, please email me. It'll be big companies doing that. It'll be the big companies where they say, where every update they say the changes and the change log are bug fixes and improvements to make your life better. Look at our full review notes at facebook.com/whatever. You're going to see Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, they're going to be responding to every single review with some kind of useless form response. But it's really up in the air whether people like us, smaller developers who will actually respond in a human fashion and might actually give useful responses other than please contact us privately, that remains to be seen how that'll go. And the value of this system and how much of a support burden the system is will all depend on those implementation details and how many people actually read them.
What I do like, though, is that it is, I feel like it provides an opportunity for a smaller developer to, one of the things that I when I was early on to be being independent, I'd always write things in the third person and talk as though I was a big company, because I thought that's we've been working hard on this update. It's no, I've been working hard on this update. I'm the only one writing code. It's just me, and it's kind of dishonest to project something otherwise. And so I do like about this, though, is that it does give an opportunity to feel, it's to show the world that personal level, that it's I can respond to something directly and in a human, authentic way. And over the long term, I found that since I stopped trying to do that and I made things more personal, I feel like that it has engendered a much higher, affection's a weird word for something like this, but it's that same kind of feeling of people like me and like my software because they like me. And so I do like that it's going to be something that we can kind of react and be a bit more personal in.
Yeah, it humanizes us, and I think that will make people be less nasty.
Sure, and I think honestly that's another example of something that I hadn't even really thought of. But I wonder if it'll improve the quality of reviews that are left. In the same, we always joke about, oh, we never read our reviews, they're all so awful and nasty. But if customers who leave nasty reviews start being responded to by humans and people, they may be less inclined, or at least for some people, maybe less inclined to leave those reviews than if in their mind they're just kind of, it's a big megaphone that they can just shout at the world and then run away from. If it's actually they shout at the world and then the person who they were shouting at comes back and talks to them in a calm, collected way, maybe they'll think, second guess that choice next time, and it'll improve the discord. Maybe that's just, again, my hopeful, wishful thinking, but, a man can dream.
All right. And with that, we're out of time. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.